Welcome to Every Trait, the Biopunk philosophy channel. You may call me ZJ for now, and we're still in phase one. Today, we're going to talk about how to put Biopunk options into a tabletop role playing game. We're also going to talk about design philosophy in tabletop role playing games when it comes to species and race options as well as part of this. So, most games that have gene mods in them use what I call the add on method, which is you have an existing character and you add on these mods, and it's sort of a power fantasy because you don't have to trade off anything for them usually. The trade off is usually just the cost. And this is not super realistic. This is what you see in like Starfinder to some extent, Cyberpunk, the tabletop version, not the video game. This isn't super realistic because gene mods would all pretty much be the same cost. So having like a more useful one in combat being more expensive, and that's how you do the trade off, that doesn't really work. So we're looking to create some more realistic options for a biopunk role playing game. So the three methods that come to mind, the first is what I call same as. Now, same as is the same as other role playing games in that you use gene mod lines in place of like races or species. So in other words, you don't get to pick individual mods. You don't get to pick your skin layer, your deep tissue layer, your bone layer, all these individual gene mods. Instead, you're picking from preset lines like races or species in a normal role-playing game like D&D or Pathfinder. So this method works really well for settings that are combat heavy because it keeps things moving. The GM can really easily keep track of who has what abilities because there's only so many preset combinations. This only really works in settings where there were certain lines created for like big purposes, like maybe for military purposes or like aquatic people to work on underwater rigs, something like that. So, and we'll go over a setting design for that last, since we have to go over species design philosophy before we can even do that. So I want to move on now to the second method, which is cultural balancing. So cultural balancing works if you want the gene mods to be straight up power fantasy, unrealistic power fantasy. You're instead balancing it by cultural restraints against them. And this is pretty realistic. I mean, you think about it in the real world, if that technology existed, most people would choose not to use it. So, by virtue of that, a vast majority of people would be non-modified. It would be pretty easy for them to, make modifieds a second-class citizen. People who write fiction often, are fear mongering about mods ruling the world, but in reality, it would probably be the other way around. This works really well in settings that have a lot of roleplay as the primary focus because all of the implications of that sort of class structure, and if you're playing a mod, you're a lower class citizen, and all of that having to fight just to survive and that sort of thing. It really lends itself to a lot of roleplay and plot threads and things. And so, to give you an example of a setting like this, we could have one where um, maybe there's a UBI, but you only get it if you're a default person. And if you're a mod, you don't. And so, you don't get paid as much for missions because that represents higher taxes on you. And maybe there's a high market that is really expensive, and anything you buy from it is gene locked to you. So you can never sell it to someone else. So it would be really hard for a mod character to even get this equipment. And the normal idea of a regular person is that they're supposed to be the most versatile thing in the game. And so this would kind of maintain that because they would be able to get gear for any role that is better than what modified people would be really have access to. So this would be a really like charged setting with some pretty heavy themes. So really good for role play. The third method is realistic. So realistically, mods are automatic trade-offs. You don't really need to artificially put anything in to make there be a trade-off. With cyber mods, this is really obvious because you've got vulnerability to hacking, jamming, EMPs. Regular people in gene mods are not vulnerable to those things. But with gene mods, it's a little more, you have to think about the actual mechanics of it. So, digitigrade legs. You can't run a marathon. You can sprint faster and jump farther, but you cannot run a marathon. Uh, Increased strength to weight ratio, higher protein intake needed. Super brain. Now you need more calories. And in your day to day life, you would feel these trade offs because your body having to process all those extra things and things that's putting more on your digestive system, your circulatory system, and might shorten your lifespan. But in a video game or a tabletop role playing game, the trade off really won't be felt because you're in a sci fi setting where you can print food and you have vehicles everywhere. It doesn't matter if you can't run a marathon. It doesn't matter that you need more calories and protein. It doesn't factor in. And so that's why normally you wouldn't use realistic balancing. Even though you would feel it in your day to day life if it were real, it doesn't really factor into a game. So this is best for games where the primary focus is exploration and survival, because now it matters. If you're in a survival scenario, suddenly it matters that you can't run a marathon or that you need more food. So the trade off becomes more tangible. And so that's all you need is the realistic trade off then. You don't need any fancy other system. So to create a setting for this, let's say humanity made it to another world, but we had to modify ourselves to survive on that world because it was so different. And then we made it to another world out, and another, and another, and another. And eventually we found one that was almost identical to Earth. It was a paradise. Regular people could survive there without modification. And that was the goal all along, was to find a second Earth. So humanity stopped exploring. But you're one of the ones who still flies farther. In fact, that would probably be a good name for it, is flying farther. You go to new planets, you scan them from orbit, and try to guess what kind of mods would be needed to survive there. You then mod yourself. This would be your character modding in character to survive on that planet. And then you go down with nothing more than what you can carry. You have a shuttle, but you can never use it. If you take it back to your ship, you failed the mission. So the mission is to prove you can survive there without resupply, to prove that you could create a colony and not just an outpost. So if you have to fly back, well, that was just an outpost then. It doesn't count. A colony is not a colony if you need resupply from outside. It's only a colony if it's self-sustaining. So that would be the goal of the game, would be to survive on strange alien worlds for like a set amount of time. Now, going back to same as, in order to figure out like what races to use, what species to use, we need to first talk about the design philosophy of various species options in games currently. I've noticed certain patterns in these, and it's important that when someone selects an option, when a player selects an option, that they get what they expect to get. This is important. If you advertise something as one thing and then it turns out to be something else, people are not happy. I've seen movies where the trailer like advertised it as a comedy, but it was filmed and edited as a serious movie, and as a result, it got bad reviews and no one liked it. If it had been advertised as what it was, there may have been less people in the door on opening weekend, but it would have ended up with a higher rating in terms of approval rating, because people just don't like to be advertised one thing and be given something else. So it's important to understand design philosophy of these options. Now, as I count them, there's 4 options. There's humany, monstrous, beast folk, and truly alien. So truly alien would be anything without a skeleton. You know, anything that's, or if it has one, it is a skeleton. It's made of goop or it's made of energy. Beast folk, animal people. Monstrous is like your orcs, your goblins, and humany is, well, humans, elves, dwarves, halflings, that sort of thing. So humany traditionally represents versatility. If someone picks a humany option, they're going to expect to be able to do anything. And you see this. The no mobility is, high saves, and that's useful to any class. Humans, half-elves, most versatile things in D&D. Even elves and dwarves get a wide range of different proficiencies. You know, maybe a free spell for the case of elves and like a bunch of other stuff. Halflings, luck is universally useful. Now, we think of ourselves as the most versatile thing that can be, and that's because we live on a planet where there's nothing else that's sapient. So we are the most versatile thing, but if there were other sapient beings, they'd probably be just as versatile as us, if we're being honest. But this is the trope, this is what people expect to get, so this is what you do. People also pick Humany if they want a character that has a certain strength of will. If you stop some ancient evil and you're an energy being from the sky, you probably were able to stop it because you were an energy being from the sky. But if you stop some ancient evil as a regular Joe Farmer, that means a little more. Um, Another reason why people might pick Humany is if they want self insertion or if they want an easier time playing the game. You don't have to think about this thing having different instincts than a human and culture that no human culture has ever been to make decisions. All you have to think about is at most like a different time scale because of elves or whatever. You don't really need to think about um, fundamentally different instincts, right? So it's easier to roleplay as a human race. You can just roleplay as a person. It's simple. So it's easier to roleplay. That's why people might pick that. So next we have monstrous. In many ways, this is the opposite of humany because monstrous is usually built in most systems to be really good at one thing. So this is like power fantasy, right? So instead of being versatile, orcs are traditionally shock troops, goblins are guerrilla warriors, tieflings are charisma casters, minotaurs are chargers. Minotaurs look beast folk, but they are monstrous, right? In terms of the way they're portrayed. So if someone picks a monstrous race, they should be getting something that is really good at one thing. It's like super tanky or something. Another reason people might pick this is because underdog status. They want to play as an underdog. No one expects you to be a hero. No one even expects you to be competent. But you're going to prove them wrong, right? Another reason why people might play monstrous is for intimidation factor. They just want to be something big and scary. So next we have beast folk. Beast folk represent self-sufficiency. They will often be really good at survival. So they will have usually a built-in weapon, enhanced movement of some kind so they can get away from danger. They might have enhanced senses or free survival training, maybe free stealth skill or something. But yeah, the general idea is you take a human, you take a beast folk, you dump them both in a hostile jungle. You come back in months. The human is lost a lot of weight, has some abscesses and rashes and things, barely holding on. The beast folk has gotten fat. So that's the general idea: is that they can survive really easily. And so if someone picks that, that's what you should give them. You should give them a natural weapon, enhanced movement, things like that. And the enhanced movement is almost a metaphor for what else they represent, which is freedom. So beast folk represent freedom because we're used to seeing animals do whatever they want. And so, you know, beast folk will often have less social constraints, less requirements. They can't go around stealing things or like attacking people, but they can get away with a lot because there aren't any social norms for them. And this is why you'll notice on the Venn diagram, I put gnomes actually in between humany and beast folk because this is also true for gnomes in D&D. If a human blows up a building and they own the building and no one gets hurt, they're still getting arrested if they did it in town. If a gnome does the same thing, well, that's just what gnomes do, you know. So they get away with it. So, and this is why I think gnomes are the least popular of the humany options in D&D, even though they have a really good ability. And that's because story-wise, they make more sense as beast folk. So, but beast folk, yeah, they will often be very eccentric. They'll often be very um, bizarre. And some of this comes from a dark place. It comes from the fact that they're also looked down on, like monstrous is. And they might never be able to get full acceptance, so there's no point trying to fit in. So they sort of secondarily fill some of the same roles as monstrous does in being underdogs and potentially even being intimidating, depending on the species. Obviously, like a little rabbit person, not that intimidating, but. And the reason I put Null in between monstrous and beast folk is it just depends on the setting. In D&D, Nulls are a demonic parasitic mutagen, whereas in Pathfinder, they're a misunderstood race of utilitarian hyena people. And that's all they are. So they're both monstrous or beast folk, depending on the setting. And if you'll notice, I put Dragonborn right in the middle because their story beats are humany, strength of will. They're built monstrous. They only do like their one thing. And they look beast folk. So they're all three, which makes sense for a setting that's centered around dragons. Now we'll move on to Truly Alien. So Truly Alien has abilities that are really bizarre. So that sort of makes them the opposite of Beast Folk, whereas Beast Folk abilities tend to be really down to earth. Truly Alien abilities tend to be really bizarre, really freaky. This could be, like I said, a race made of energy or goop, or a plant race, or an insect race, or a machine race. Um, and story-wise, what they stand for is just pure escapism. You are playing as something that does not think like a chordate, not like a mammal, not like anything like a human. It has fundamentally different hopes and fears. So this is just pure escapism. Now, if we look at which ones are most and least popular of these four, we see that Truly Alien is the least popular. And I think this is why. It represents escapism, and so does the entire concept of ttrpgs. So if you can do escapism with any of the other three options, why would you need to have a corner just for that? You know, so I think that's why they're the least popular. Currently, Humany is the most popular by far, and it probably always will be. Most people's first character is just themselves, but magic or buff or whatever. Uh, and then it's also the easiest one to play. Monstrous is the second most popular, although it's a distant second. Beast Folk is just past that. And then Truly Alien is the distant fourth. And I think that in the near future, with the current trends happening, Monstrous and Beast Folk are going to switch places. I think Beast Folk will be more popular than Monstrous. And the reason for this is twofold. First, monstrous characters have been defanged. You see this in Pathfinder first with, goblins becoming more civilized and trading with humans more, and gnolls just being a hyena race, whereas in D&D they're a parasitic demonic mutagen. So they're, monstrous races are getting defanged over time to try to make them more easy to roleplay as, less roleplay barriers, that sort of thing. They're being defanged. They're no longer as intimidating. They're no longer underdogs. So the whole point of playing a monstrous race is dying out. And Beast Folk fill those same roles of being an underdog and being intimidating. So it's quite possible that they will supersede monstrous for that reason. And there's another reason too, which is that what they represent is self-sufficiency and freedom. As there get to be more people in the world, it's harder to be self-sufficient. You might feel self-sufficient, but whatever device you're watching this on, you probably didn't source it from a river and a mountainside. You probably didn't harvest the materials to make the tools, to harvest the materials, to make the tools, to harvest the materials, to make the circuits, and then program it all. Okay, so it's really hard to be self-sufficient today, just with the level of technology and how many people there are. And current trends seem to be people are becoming less free over time as well. So as people lose freedoms and as people become less self-sufficient, the species type in games that represents freedom and self-sufficiency is going to continue to become more and more popular. So now we go back to the same as method for making a biopunk setting. So we're going to have a sci-fi setting, a biopunk setting. What do we want in terms of options? Well, we want humany, of course, but if it's a sci-fi setting in the future, there's not going to be very many humany. It's not going to be elves. There's not going to be dwarves. So what do we have? We have regular humans as our first option. We probably want 2 humany, 2 beast folk, and 1 monstrous. If we only have 5, that would be the 5. So we can have a default non-modified person, and they would get they could get like extra versatility. Maybe there's training modules that you can use, but that like train your brain, like give you an instant skill or something, but they only work with normal human neural pathways, so you have to be a default person to use them. You could also be a cyber mod. That would be the second option. And that would have the added advantage of being able to do full immersive VR, things like that. The added disadvantage of being vulnerable to hacking, jamming, EMPs. And then for our Beast Folk options, we could have the first one, I think, should be what I call that HKSR, which stands for Hunter, Killer, Search, and Rescue. It is a mod that's all about mobility and senses. So get to anyone, find anyone, get to anyone. So it could be a Hunter, Killer, or Search and Rescue. It's a very realistic mod type that I use as an example a lot. So that would be one of the beast folk, and it perfectly fits because they could have increased movement, increased senses, all that. For our next beast folk, depending on where we're at, if we're at a coastal city, we might want an amphibious race, an aquatic race. If we're high in the mountains, we might want a flying species. Now, in order to do this, you would have to make them small, like 3 feet tall, but with little fingers at the apex of their wings, because your arms would be your wings. There's not really room in the human skeleton for another pair of limbs on the back, and even if there were, well, we'll get into that in a later video. But given that the most populous cities tend to be coastal, and given that cyberpunk and biopunk settings tend to take place in really populated cities, I think the aquatic race would probably be the better option. And then we'd have one monstrous that could be a generic super soldier, kind of orc-like, thick rhino-like hide, anger management problems. Generally looked down on because they tend to be less intelligent than the average person because they were made to be pliable, to follow orders, that sort of thing. So they're a little bit simple by design. And so they're underdogs, but they're also really big and really intimidating. So they would just be really, really hard to kill, and they would be hard to shove around in combat. They'd be able to really plant their feet, So, and those would be the 5 options if there were only 5. Now, if there's more than 5, you could add more things. Maybe even a truly alien option. That would be pretty easy to fit in. It would be just a fully AI thing, like a utility drone, kind of like an R2-D2 type thing. You could add that. You could add more beast folk options. Because if you're doing gene mods, I mean, where are you getting the genes from? Probably from other species. So that's going to be that a lot of the time. And the story for how this all came about, these different species, the HKSRs would have been developed for military use, probably. They would be search and rescue in peacetime, hunter-killer in wartime. And the aquatics also, I mean, think about the tomfoolery an aquatic could get up to in military. They could swim up under a carrier or under, a ship. They would completely change naval warfare, like overnight. So, not to mention they could be used on underwater rigs and things. So, just think about what kind of super soldiers could also be used for combat. So maybe there was some big war in the past. Maybe there was like an alien threat or something, and so people needed to adapt very quickly, and so they needed all these mods. And now that's done with, and now we live in a biopunk world in the aftermath of that, and people are trying to grapple with all these new types of people existing, and they're but that would be just an example of same as. So I personally probably will never get around to making a tabletop role-playing game. I don't see myself doing that in the near future. But hopefully I've given you some ideas. Even if you disagree with what I'm saying here, hopefully I at least gave you some ideas on the design philosophy of species and of mods and games. That was my only goal today. So that's all I have to say for now. Thank you for listening. I have been ZJ, and remember, always gene mod responsibly. Clicky, 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 clicky.